Grant Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Chair. It's a pleasure to take a call in part 2 of this bill, and I want to focus my initial contribution on the section of the bill that deals with the communications framework, and in particular clauses 71 through, or clause 74 in particular. And Mr Chair, it may come as a surprise to those who follow tax legislation intimately and closely that this particular section tended to be more like an English grammar class. Chris Bishop came into his own during this period as somebody who was educated in sort of the 2000s when grammar was taught. I struggled because I went to school in the 1980s where they stopped teaching grammar at all, and so some of this was confusing to me. But that's right. Well, that particular Labor government, yes, Mr Bishop. But yeah, this was quite an interesting and actually quite important part of the bill. And essentially, what this was about doing was trying to simplify and make clear different forms of the ways in which IRD interacts with taxpayers, and try and bring that into the modern age at the same time as defining various terms. And essentially what the bill did was it set up 3 tiers of interactions between IRD and taxpayers, and then sought to define those. Now, the committee did actually come to the conclusion that we needed to amend aspects of this to make absolutely clear to taxpayers the meaning of these different terms. So the 3 tiers that were proposed were a tier that included the terms asking, requesting or informing, and that any one of the following is a means by which you can do that: by telephone, orally in person, by electronic means, in print, or in another manner acceptable to the Commissioner. Well, no, that's right. And you may well ask, Mr Farfoy, what does that mean? So we could take the example, perhaps, of when whether or not John Key asked, requested or informed Bill English that he was going to put tax cuts back on the table 3 days after Mr English had taken them off. Now, he certainly didn't notify him, which is something we'll come to shortly, nor formally notify him, so he possibly did ask or inform him by phone, orally in person, by electronic means, and perhaps he texted him. He may have done that. So this is the lowest level of form of communication, is asking, requesting or informing. Then we included, Mr Bennett was all over the detail of this when we went through it, I can tell you. Then we came to applying or notifying, by which any one of the following is an acceptable means to apply or notify: by electronic means, in print or in another manner acceptable to the Commissioner. So we've stepped up here, and so you can't do it by phone. You can't just drop into the IRD and let them know. You actually have to do it by electronic means, in print or in a manner that is acceptable to the Commissioner. And then the highest tier of communications is that of formally notifying, in print, delivered personally or by registered post, but not by way of email, the internet or other electronic means. And Mr Chair, I guess in many ways that starts to show us the limits of what we were trying to do here in the committee. So it's a recognition that most people are not going to fax through the communication. Mr Cosgrove might still fax people, as he does from time to time. but actually most people have moved on from that, and frankly most people have moved on from using the post to communicate with IRD. And so these clauses do have a serious element, which is that it is time to bring the IRD into the 21st century and have email as an acceptable form of communication. But Mr Chair, what we learned in the committee is that from a tax accountant's point of view, from those people who are have regular interaction with the tax system, these terms need to have specific meaning within specific acts. So the Tax Administration Act is one of those, but the Income Tax Act as well. And unless those terms are notified, we had submitters come to the committee and tell us that this could provide some difficulty. And they felt that the 3 tiers weren't well defined or sufficiently defined within each of those acts. So in a sort of belt and braces approach, we now, by amendment of the committee, have decided that we will define each of those terms in each place that it appears in taxation legislation. And as I say, Mr Chair, you might think that this is not an important thing, but if people fail to comply with what the IRD wants from them, there are serious penalties. And if they don't know that, for example, notifying can't take place by telephone, then they may find themselves in breach of various things. And so that is actually an important thing to be able to make clear to taxpayers, that the way that they communicate with the Inland Revenue Department is confined. Mr Chair, I tell you there's more to come on this. So Mr Chair, this I think is actually an important part of it. That's right. Only this is only Tier 1 notification, I can tell you. We've got more coming here. Interestingly, the IRD themselves were very keen to tell us that they were trying to put emails on the same footing as paper letters delivered by post. And I think, as I say, for most people that is important. However, at its most highest level, the formal notification, that is still by post and not electronically. One day, perhaps, that will change. Mr Chair, there was an element of future proofing, so there is some ability for the Commissioner to be able to say, as new technologies arise, as new forms of communication occur, they can be adopted into the practices of IRD without needing necessarily to change the legislation every single time that occurs. So, Mr Chair, that is in advance. There was a bit of confusion, I have to say, between the officials, our expert advisor, the submitters and ourselves about the exact meaning of various terms, but under the clause 74 and related clauses, I do believe we have now found our way to a position where people will be able to understand what is required of them, and certainly electronic means are now possible to be used for at least the first 2 tiers of communication between IRD and others. Yes, and it's an advance. It is, to quote the title of the bill, transformational, because that's the standard this government has for transformation, the meaning of the word notify. So we will come back in a later debate to the title of this bill, and I think this is the point at which we must acknowledge the radical transformation of the definitions of the words notify and inform and ask and request. So well done to the government, radical agenda there. That'll turbocharge the economy for you right there. Mr Chair, the other point I wanted to make was related to this, and that is the use of electronic signatures, which had previously not been allowed, but are now allowed under this legislation. There was some concern about the veracity of them and how they could be stored and so on. But actually, again, this is the modern world. Electronic signatures are your own signature, and in a whole lot of walks of life, people use electronic signatures where they have obligations under the law, and there's no reason why the Inland Revenue Department can't be in a position to also deal with that. The other matter, which I may not get to finish in this call, but I'll certainly happily take up another call. Well, my colleague Clayton Cosgrove will want to talk about this because it was a matter that he was seized of when the committee considered it, and that's the question of co-location of officers. And I know Mr Bishop enjoyed these discussions as well. So IRD, as a number of government departments are now, co-located with other government agencies. And in Christchurch, for instance, the Ministry of Social Development is looking at being in with IRD because they are the people who are going to be in the Christchurch CBD, because Jerry Brownlee's forced all the government agencies in there, and so they're going to be working together. And there is an issue about the secrecy requirements on IRD staff versus the secrecy requirements on other government agencies. And we had a very long and in-depth discussion in the committee about how to manage this. And in the end, what the committee came down on the side of was saying that IRD employees are not considered to have breached secrecy conditions if they did not intend the breach and took the care reasonable for place and conditions to prevent it. And that notion of reasonable care was what the committee inserted into the bill. And, as I say, there was considerable debate about this in the sense that you could be said to have, if you've knowingly contravened the Act, if you've deliberately gone out and broken secrecy rules, then there are punishments that should follow that. But whether or not you're sitting in a co-located environment, you're having a conversation with one of your IRD colleagues about a taxpayer or a tax matter, which you are able to do, and you're both aware of your obligations. If there is a staff member of another government agency within earshot, to what extent is that the responsibility of the IRD staff member to not have those kinds of conversations? And, the nature of modern workspaces now with open plan means that the risks of this increase. And in fact, all of the sort of co-located ministries and so on are starting to work in those environments. And on the committee, we were concerned because the secrecy of taxpayer information is something we should all take seriously. And it is actually more often than not a higher obligation than that of other government agencies. So we were concerned to make sure that we had adequate protections in place around both the understanding that taxpayers would have of how their information would be treated, and I'll come back to that.
Mr. Chairman. The Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.